Raider Nation, what's going on? It's Mitchell Renz here, host of the Raiders Report, and the Las Vegas Raiders just officially made 12 roster moves that we will break down here on today's episode. Though, two of the moves that we will discuss today were technically made yesterday that I did a video on. I also said in the moves of Jaylon Smith and Jonathan Sutherland that I'd be making a longer video today on both of those signings. But before we break down everything, I do want to say Happy Mother's Day out there to all the moms out there, you know, to my mom, my grandmother, Alex's mom, a lot of amazing people. But you would have already known that the Raiders signed those two players in Sutherland and Jaylon Smith if you were subscribed, which is exactly why I want you to hit that sub button, because even though on Mother's Day, I made 2 videos yesterday. Why? Because we got to be built different here on the Raiders Report. So coming up here today, I'm also going to break down a little bit more again of the Jaylon Smith, Jonathan Sutherland news that happened yesterday, on top of the 4 players that the Raiders signed today and the 6 players that the Raiders decided to move on from. We will first start, though, with the players that the Raiders waived/cut today. Dominic Boyd, he ends up getting waived. He was one of the UDFAs that the Raiders brought in, an offensive tackle prospect. One of the more notable names, and I'll be real, I would say the most notable name that got waived was linebacker Amari Burney. Now, Burney was somebody that was a part of the Josh McDaniels, Dave Ziegler regime, drafted in the 5th round out of Florida back in 2023. And I know Burney is an extremely athletic player, but there were some unknowns of how good he was going to be able to be a linebacker, was confident he was going to be a good special teams player. I think one of the biggest reasons why the Raiders moved on from Burney, Jaylon Smith is going to be a part of that, but then also on top of that, the Raiders went out, they drafted Cody Lindenberg. And one of the names that I've really been throwing out there to keep an eye on is Amari Gainer. And I think that Gainer offers you some of that coverage ability that, quite frankly, Burney was just never able to get going. And when you are a really good athlete and yet you can't quite get the ball rolling in the right direction, I don't really think that the Raiders want to go down another path of a Dollar General type of Divine Diablo, which is kind of the way that Amari Burney always reminded me. I will say I wish the best of luck to him. It's got to be difficult going through 3 different regimes, and I think that's ultimately why the Raiders also decided to move on from Burney. Another notable name that ended up getting waived today was Matthew Butler, Raiders defensive tackle. Butler also was drafted by the Josh McDaniels, Dave Ziegler regime. This was back in 2022 in the 5th round out of Tennessee. He's been on the Raiders practice squad. He's been on the Raiders roster. He's kind of bounced around a little bit. And I'll be real, you know, Chugs and I did a show probably 2.5 years ago, right before the NFL draft. And one of the shows that we did was, first year after the Raiders drafted Neil Farrell Jr. and the first year after the Raiders drafted Butler, we heard from a really good source that the Raiders weren't happy with their work ethic. They moved on from Neil Farrell Jr. They traded him to the Chiefs. And then also Butler was kind of mentioned of not having the best work ethic. I think for an organization that wants to go out there and compete, ultimately, that's why I think Butler ended up getting tossed. So out of these 2 names, because I would say these are probably the 2 most notable names of the people that got cut, though there is another name that I could imagine some people would say, well, hey, you're forgetting about somebody that's also very notable. We'll talk about him in just a second. But out of these 2 names, who's the more surprising cut? If you think it's Matthew Butler, give me an MB. If you think it's Amari Burney, give me an AB. I feel like when I say AB, I got to say FAB, so let's get some FABs down below, but that's the more notable one. When I did my Raiders 53-man roster projection video, I had Burney making it. I'll admit, I didn't know exactly how many we were going to keep, but seeing the fact that the Raiders are moving on from Burney now when they did, makes me feel a little bit more confident about Gainer, but very uneasy feeling. If the Raiders feel that Jaylon Smith can help this team win at linebacker, I don't care what anybody says. That does make me feel a little bit nervous about our linebacker room. Let's go to some other players here that ended up getting waived. Tyreek McAllister, fun little special teams player, wide receiver. We've been seeing the Raiders been bringing in a lot of wide receiver talent this offseason already, and a few of the players that they signed were wide receivers. But for McAllister, I thought if he was going to be able to make this squad, it was going to be kick return, punt return duties. The fact that Tommy Malott is really taking a strong hold on that, with Dylan Laube also being there. I think also Trey Tucker might be thrown into that mix. Tyreek McAllister's got 4.3 speed, but it's not going to be 4.3 speed on this team. Another player that ended up getting waived today was Brandon Smith, linebacker. He was somebody that was a part of the regime last season, finished the team on the practice squad, ended up re-signing with the Raiders, again, earlier this offseason. ended up moving on from him. Penn State guy, that kind of stinks a little bit. And then another player that got released. So the difference between waived and released. Released, you can sign with anybody. You also have to have 4 years in the NFL. Christian Wilkerson's been in the NFL for 4 years. So that is the release. Wilkerson can literally sign with any NFL team. If I had to guess, the New England Patriots would be the number one flipping team that's going to sign him, because that's New England ties, Josh McDaniels ties. All the other players will have to go through waivers, and I would imagine that maybe one of those guys, if I had to imagine, the top name would be Amari Burney. Maybe Tyreek McAllister go through waivers and end up getting signed. But those were the 6 players that are no longer members of the Las Vegas Raiders, which means coming up here on the show, we're going to talk about the players that the Raiders did bring into this organization. And I'll be honest, I'm seeing a lot of these names for the first time. The video that you will get tomorrow, and the video why, again, I want you to subscribe, I'm going to do a much larger breakdown of all 6 of the players, Jaylon Smith, Sutherland included, of why I think that the Raiders decided to bring them on right after rookie minicamp. Before I talk about the 6 players that the Raiders signed, we are going to be live 4 times this week, so it's a jam-packed week here at the Raiders Report. Normal live tomorrow. It's still TBD if I'm going to have a player interview. I was going to do a video later on today. I didn't know that all these roster moves are going to happen, so I'm hoping to know whether or not we're going to interview one of the Raiders draftees tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern time. But all of our shows this week, 4 p.m. Eastern time. On Wednesday, we're probably going to be live 4 hours because schedule gets released 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll go live at 4 p.m. Eastern time, so that's a 4-hour live. Thursday, normal live show, and then Friday, our very first Week 1 Madden Sim. Make sure you pull up. It's going to be an absolute party. Subscribe to the Raiders Report. Let's go to the Raiders signings that happened. Jaylon Smith, he ended up signing on Mother's Day on Sunday, and worked out all 3 days with the Raiders during rookie minicamp, signed on Sunday, last played with the Raiders in 2023, known for being a team captain, known for being a really good locker room presence, and ever since he suffered that just wicked knee injury at Notre Dame, hasn't really been the same, but he is only 29 years old. Another player that the Raiders signed over the weekend was Jonathan Sutherland, who has not played in the NFL, played 5 years at Penn State, and the reason why I wore the Penn State sweatshirt today is because Sutherland, him and Sean Clifford, who was a quarterback, are the only 2 players in Penn State history to ever be named a team captain for 4 years. So the video that I was going to do today was talk about why the Raiders signed Jaylon Smith, why the Raiders signed Jonathan Sutherland, and instead we're just breaking down some of these guys a little bit more in depth. But if you want a very much more in-depth video, kind of like I would almost say like UDFA tracker signings, that video is going to be coming out tomorrow here on the Raiders Report. So make sure you turn on those notifications. That way you don't miss it. Now the players that the Raiders just recently signed, like that I am seeing the 4 new names. First name is Jafari Harvey, 6'4", 252-pound edge rusher from SMU. I've seen a few SMU games being based down here in Dallas. Intriguing prospect overall, and I think what the Raiders are really trying to do is just add more competition to that room, but then also Harvey's got a connection with also one of the UDFAs that the Raiders had in Tank. I can't remember his other name. It was Tank Booker, the defensive tackle from SMU. Really, really big boy. Let's go to another signing the Raiders had. Wide receiver Katron Jackson Jr., 12 catches, 236 yards from the University of Baylor. But what's the one common factor that we see all the time right now, especially at wide receiver? Long, lanky athlete, 6'3", 205. The Raiders also went out and signed another receiver from SMU, 6'1", 191. The Raiders want to get longer. Pete Carroll's teams are all about that length. 33 catches, 527 yards, 5 touchdowns. Let's also look at another move that the Raiders made. Wesley Steiner, 6'1", 242-pound, I believe, linebacker from Washington State. So they go out, they get Steiner. Maybe this is going to add a little bit more of talent, again, on the special teams realm, add a little bit more talent at linebacker and depth overall. But to me, the Raiders are showing you they want guys that can compete. And I'm going to be really interested to see when I do some more of the deep diving on the homework, the tape breakdown, because I don't know all those players all that well, and that's going to be the video that you guys are going to get tomorrow. For reminder, for more updates, you can always give me a follow on IG and on Twitter. I'm at Mitchell Renz 365, where I put out some videos over the weekend. Again, appreciate everyone for understanding that yesterday was Mother's Day. Chugs and I wanted to be with, I wanted to be with Alex's family. Jeremy wanted to be with Danny's family, his family as well. So that's why we waited to talk about the signings that we did today. But that's why you subscribe to the Raiders Report. Appreciate all y'all. We'll see you tomorrow live on the Raiders Report, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific. But be checking out early tomorrow for a video on all of these signings that the Raiders just made.